It's almost that time of year. Little people in strange costumes are going to come to my front door and demand that I give them all my sweets. It's also almost Halloween. This is easily one of my favorite times of the year. Halloween usually gets me in the mood to do something really spooky to get into the holiday spirit, so I joined a cult. It was either this or getting murdered. They gave me my cult robes in the mail, but I'm not a true member until I complete an initiation ritual. First off, they want me to... just to talk about some cult classic video games. Really wish they told me that before I slaughtered that lamb. So what is a cult classic? A cult classic is defined as anything that wasn't popular or successful when it first came out, but garners a dedicated fan base sometime after. Some of the most well-known cult classic things are movies such as The Breakfast Club, The Fifth Element, and Reservoir Dogs. But in terms of video games, cult classics are way more widespread than you think. Whether they were unpopular at launch, or didn't get localized until fan translations decades later, or just flew under the general gaming radar, there are plenty of video game cult classics out there. People really love not giving a shit about something when it's actually relevant. There's simply far too many examples of cult classic video games out there for me to discuss, plenty of which you haven't even played before, even though I'd love to. Vampire the Masquerade, Bloodlines, Eco, System Shock, Night Trap. So I just wanted to talk about some cult classic video games that I personally am a fan of. The first up on the list is one I'm actually playing for the first time, Ubisoft's Beyond Good and Evil. Released in 2003 for the GameCube, PS2, and Xbox, Beyond Good and Evil was the brainchild and baby of Michel Ancel, better known as the creator of Rayman. Rayman is one of my all-time favorite game series, about a limbless abomination traversing happy, colorful worlds. Beyond Good and Evil is the exact opposite of this. You play as Jade, a journalist and spy working with this half-picked guy to save orphan children, take down a corrupt government, and prevent the alien takeover of this planet known as Hellas. This game has always intrigued me, mostly because of the stark contrast between it and Rayman. I haven't heard many people talk about Beyond Good and Evil, but the few times I have, it's always piqued my interest. Like man, Michel Ancel must have had some demons to go from funny haha platforming levels to genocide and corporate espionage. Beyond Good and Evil sold pretty poorly at launch, with both Ancel himself and Ubisoft as a whole reporting that it had a pretty terrible launch and didn't even come close to meeting their expectations through the 2003 holiday season. But why is that? Well, this is one of those instances where it is absolutely not because of the game's quality. I only played about an hour or so of it, and it's such a story-focused game that really isn't enough to form a full opinion on the game yet, but I can easily say that what I played was very high quality. The game opens up with some pretty high stakes as the orphans you're looking after get abducted by these alien things. You get thrust right into combat, which is simple, but not to a fault. After a very brief mini-boss and some cryptic foreshadowing, you're given a couple of objectives and, for the most part, free reign of the entire world. Given that Jade is a journalist, her first mission is to photograph the local wildlife on Hellas for some research company. Oh man, I love Pokemon Snap. The game is semi-open world and features things like vehicle segments, as you drive this motorboat around to get from place to place. Like I said, I only played about an hour or so of the game, but I was so hooked that it made me want to keep playing. The world was super intriguing, and it made me want to actually delve deeper into the mystery that's going on behind this planet. The plot manages to hook you without being overbearing like it is in other games. It's just mysterious enough that it makes you actually want to keep playing and figure out what the hell is going on. So I can safely check this game off and say, yes, it's deserving of the cult classic label. Moving on, next up is a game I'm all too familiar with, Conker's Bad Fur Day. In the grand scheme of games considered to be cult classics, this one is actually pretty well known by the gaming community, probably because it was developed by Rare. Rare are the makers of Banjo Kazooie, GoldenEye 007, and of course my beloved Donkey Kong Country. During the Super Nintendo and N64 eras, they were easily one of the most well-known and most respected video game studios out there. Their output on the N64 especially was pretty much the only third-party support Nintendo had that gen. Shortly after Super Mario 64 came out and pretty much created the modern 3D platformer, a small team at Rare began immediately working on a 3D platformer of their own. At E3 1997, Rare revealed the game as 12 Tales Conker's Quest. Reporters who attended E3 that year labeled the game as good, but a bit too similar to Banjo Kazooie, which, looking at this archive footage, I have to agree with. The game was shown off as Conker's Quest one more time during E3 1998, but afterwards, the game was heavily reworked behind the scenes, due to a myriad of issues varying from infighting from the team behind it to Rare just prioritizing other games. The game was absent from E3 1999, but was shown off again the year after, being re-revealed as the game we all know and love, Conker's Bad Fur Day. Rare knew the market for cute, family-friendly 3D platformers was kind of oversaturated by the time the year 2000 rolled around, especially with Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, and especially Rare's own Donkey Kong 64 and Banjo-Kazooie being released prior. So Rare artist Chris Seaver brought up the idea to make the game a super R-rated parody of games of that type, being a day-in-the-life story about the alcoholic potty-mouthed red squirrel Conker trying to get home after a drunken bender the night before. I don't have much to say about the game itself that hasn't already been said. Like I said, this is one of the more well-known cult classic games out there. There's so I'm not gonna act like no one knows anything about this game. What I will say, however, is that this game has not aged well. Conker is a platformer/adventure game hybrid. The platforming itself is fine and is actually quite fun, but the game has a pretty high focus on combat in some areas, and it is the definition of clunky. You swing this frying pan to attack, and it has a super slow wind up before you actually swing it. I will say the sound it makes when you smack something is actually hilarious. But ask anybody familiar with Conker. The gameplay is rarely what's brought up when people talk about their love for this game. No, the main reason people love this game is the characters, the charm, and especially the M-rated humor.
Were your parents related, like before they were married?
Right, that's it!
Like I said, Conker is a half platformer, half adventure game, and parts of it play out like a classic point-and-click adventure. You get sidetracked from your main goal constantly, and the entertaining characters make playing the game oddly addicting. Like here, I'm supposed to be getting some bees to get this flower to expose herself, and I wound up looking for some in this barn, which I had been into previously and gotten this pitchfork named Frankie to hang himself. That's not a joke. I wound up fighting a mini-boss involving a roid rage stack of hay, and we fall down this hole and the haystack turns into a fucking Terminator parody. I swear to God this isn't a joke. All this so I can get a flower to let me use her breast as a platform to reach a stack of money. I would never have thought to make a joke about this. Conker's Bad Fur Day is more so an experience than a game. It's one of the absolute wildest games I have ever played. You get put into some insane situations. I've played this game here and there over the years, but it's actually one of the few rareware games that I've never finished. But playing it now, I wound up playing for way longer than I needed to, and I just had a baffled expression on my face the entire time. This game's considered a cult classic because, at launch, it failed to meet Rare's and Nintendo's sales expectations, despite receiving near universal acclaim back in the day. This was unfortunately due to the game coming out at the tail end of the N64's lifespan. It released in March of 2001, 2 months before E3 2001, where they revealed the Nintendo GameCube, which came out in November of 2001. By the time the game came out, all interest in anything N64 related had fucking evaporated. Add to that the vibe of this game, it being a game with a whole lot of swearing and blood and way too much of a focus on toilet humor. Kinda conflicted with the audience the N64 had. It's like showing South Park to a pre-K class. However, this game found a cult following pretty quickly, especially given that it got a remake in 2005 for the original Xbox, after Microsoft acquired Rareware back in 2002. Conker Live and Reloaded is a full-on remake of the N64 game, and while it has some extra censorship from the original game, which is a bit odd given the Xbox had a more mature audience, it's also just a better way to play this game in my opinion. It fixes all of the clunk of the original and has graphics that are on par with some Xbox 360 games, yet it came out on the original Xbox. My only gripe with Live and Reloaded is that the color palette of the original is much more appealing to me personally, although yeah, it's still a bit too similar to Banjo Kazooie. That and the game's namesake, the extra Xbox Live multiplayer mode, can't really be played in its fullest form today. Other than that, it is, in my humble opinion, the definitive way to play Conker's Bad Fur Day. That's not to say it makes the N64 original obsolete though, not at all. In fact, you can play that version today on Rare Replay if you have an Xbox console. I'm just a sucker for 5th generation 3D platformers, and this is easily one of the best on the system. Just don't play it around your kids. That's another we can check off the list of cult classics. I got one more game to take a look at before I can finally join a cult of my own, and I saved the best for last. You see, Nintendo was a company that makes some of the most well-known games of all time, your Marios, your Zeldas, your Messiahs. But they're also responsible for some of the biggest cult classics of all time. Wind Waker, Eternal Darkness, Star Fox Assault. But only one can be considered such a cult classic. It's pretty much the definitive example of a gaming cult classic. EarthBound. Known as Mother 2 in Japan, EarthBound is a sequel to a game oddly enough titled Mother. No fucking way. Mother 1 was a quirky Famicom RPG that was all about being a parody of American culture. It featured a kid named Ninten fighting possessed people in furniture. Was his last name Doe? That game didn't make its way over here to the States until it dropped on the Wii U Virtual Console as EarthBound Beginnings. But the sequel came out over here just a year after the original in June 1995, with the name being changed from Mother 2 to EarthBound. The name change makes sense as, 1, the name Mother is something relevant to the first game that we didn't get at the time, and B, I doubt many people would buy a sequel to a game they had never heard of. Regardless, EarthBound came out over here on the Super Nintendo in 1995 to a resounding... Yeah, EarthBound flopped pretty hard over here in the US for a multitude of reasons, mostly contributing to a pretty confusing marketing campaign, and the fact that by the time it came out, everyone was hyped for the next generation of systems. Hell, the Sega Saturn had already released a month prior, so interest in 16-bit games was waning fast. And a quirky JRPG on last-gen hardware is a hard sell for most people, especially when it doesn't have the brand recognition of something like Final Fantasy. But why do so many people care about this game, especially given how it flew under the radar of pretty much everyone? Well, for that, we have Masahiro Sakurai to thank. In April of 1999, a little crossover fighting game was released on the N64 known as Super Smash Bros. Became a massive hit almost instantly, and it makes sense why. Take the most well-known Nintendo characters, hell, gaming characters as a whole, Mario, Donkey Kong, Link, Kirby, Yoshi, and put them in a crossover or anything, and you already sold that game. But it helped that Super Smash Bros. Was just a great game in general, pretty much kickstarting the whole platform fighter thing. The roster included your Nintendo mainstays, Mario, Link, Samus, Kirby, but it also included some more recent Nintendo mascots such as Fox McCloud from Star Fox and Pikachu from Pokemon. But where it really gets interesting is the unlockables. You had Luigi and Jigglypuff, but on the other end you had Captain Falcon, who was pretty much the face of the F-Zero series at the time, and of course, Ness. I can imagine many kids playing back then's first thought when unlocking him was, who the fuck is this dork? But one look at the character profiles gave us a little snippet about his personality, and of course what game he was from, that being EarthBound. This right here is pretty much the only reason people in the US know about EarthBound, and a lot of times I'll hear people saying this as if it's a bad thing, which I don't understand. There's nothing wrong with people finding out about a series that was pretty much non-existent in the West because of another game like Smash Bros. Hell, I'm willing to bet the only reason people know about Fire Emblem is because of its inclusion in Super Smash Bros. Melee. As for the game itself, I fucking love EarthBound. I've been playing it ever since I was in high school when me and my friends used our school laptops to emulate retro games to play together. In my free time, I'd play a bunch of single player stuff, and it was how I discovered a lot of games that are some of my favorites nowadays, like the Shinobi series and Tetris Attack. But EarthBound was a game that I had always wanted to play, but never had the chance to as a kid. No one I knew had the game on actual hardware, and even though Satoru Iwata mentioned it when the Wii Virtual Console was announced, it never came out on the Wii. So I emulated the game, played through the entire thing start to finish, and I adored absolutely every second of it. It's such a weird game because the overarching plot has you preventing an alien takeover of Earth by Gygas, the alien villain from the first game. But the game mostly consists of you fighting possessed dogs and snakes and crows with sunglasses, and you meet a talking bee named Buzz, and you fight a silver guy named Starman fucking Jr., which implies it's a Starman Sr., which there is. Then you get to another town and have to fight these damn never-ending blue happy cult members. Then you have to fight this really annoying kid named Porky, and god I hate this little shit, and at one point you fight zombies and puppets and there's a main character named fucking Pooh. EarthBound is a bizarre experience that I think everybody should play at least once, even if it's just trying the game out. It takes a JRPG and fuses it with 1950s alien horror movies and late 80s, early 90s American culture and humor, and the result is a game where you're always confused, but you're always having a good time. The soundtrack is a strange mixture of reggae and jazz and Chuck Berry, the weird psychedelic backgrounds when you get into a battle, the sometimes uncanny but always hilarious side characters. I could easily spend hours talking about EarthBound, but for the sake of not spoiling it for those who haven't played it, I think I'm gonna leave it there. EarthBound has one of the most dedicated fan bases for any game out there, and I'm happy to count myself among them. It's easily the cultiest of cult classics, and I can't think of a more deserving game for the cult classic label. Those are just a few games considered to be cult classics, and from what I can tell, the games that tend to gather a cult following are the ones that dare to be a little bit weird. And while it's a shame that so many of these games fail at launch, the fact that something that no one knew about when it came out can gather such a big following is kinda nice. This is a topic that has way too many examples to list. I didn't even come close to scratching the surface when it comes to cult classic games. So who knows, maybe this is a topic we can revisit again someday. But right now, I've only got one thing on the mind. I got a letter in the mail, so that can only mean I finally got accepted into the cult. Oh, this is a warrant for my arrest. Yeah, apparently the police don't take too kindly to cult activity and conspiracy to talk about video games. Maybe it's because of the lamb.